Okay, so basically what I want to talk about today is where Commvault fits in the marketplace and kind of why. In order to do that, one of the things that we kind of need to understand is how we do things today. So when you go out there and you're talking to folks, you can be realistic about knowing how they do things today. So I've kind of simplified everything here. This would be the data environment out here, which would be the host. These can be virtual hosts, these can be physical hosts, these can be any kind of host that's out there. They can be edge devices. This line right here represents the LAN, the SAN, and the WAN, which is basically what moves all of the data through the system. Currently, right now, what's happening is the way things are getting protected, and right now we're going to talk about data protection. And basically, what you have out here are little agents that sit on every one of these hosts. And what these agents do is these agents tell the system what's out here that needs to be backed up, when it needs to be backed up, where it needs to be backed up, all of those types of things. And that is all controlled by a backup server. This backup server represents any backup server that's out there besides Commvault. And to simplify this whole thing, rather than to try to draw this thing all out genetically correct, basically what I'm saying is that all of this data flows via one of these routes, and it's all put into, and I'm going to represent this as a box. So what we're doing is we're getting the data from here into this box, and the whole idea is to protect this data protection. What we're looking for is an insurance policy to make sure that if anything happens to this information that's out here on this host, that we can go back somewhere and get this data and bring it back. So this represents your tape drives, this represents backup to disk, and obviously now we're backing up to the cloud. So, so if we talk about this and we look at it, one of the things that all CIOs and CTOs are telling me that they're dealing with is explosive data growth. All of this information has to flow through one of these devices in order to get in the box and be protected, okay? So the other thing that they're telling us that they're dealing with is that their environments are getting way too complicated, and they're looking to simplify these environments. The other thing that we all know is going on out there through the virtualization process is consolidation. So they're dealing with explosive data growth, they want to simplify their environment, and they're doing that through consolidation. So if you look at this over a period of time, the number of hosts that are out here and the amount of data that's coming from these hosts is growing. Explosive data growth. This all is running through our LAN, our SAN, our WAN, and it has to go through this backup, which is the controller that is the traffic cop that says either put it on tape or put it on disk. So then what happens is we have to figure out, okay, so this is our one copy. So we have a copy here, but what's required by most companies is to get a copy of this off-site. So if it's tape right now, it's basically going into this Iron Mountain truck by hand, usually on a daily or weekly basis, and this truck is taking it to an off-site location. This is where the tapes are kept. Out here, if anything happens, this truck has to go out here, pick up the tapes, bring them back, and the backup server basically restores them to the host to get back the lost data. So if this information happens to go to disk, then basically, somehow or the other, we have to get a copy of this disk in the off-site location, and we have to use some type of replication software, again, overburdening our WAN, to get the information off-site and onto the disk. So this is basically what's going on out there in the environment right now. And what's happening during this process that they're having to deal with is this box keeps getting bigger because our data keeps growing. Just a really quick statistic, if I have 1 terabyte of primary data in the backup environment, because I have a retention policy of keeping things for 60 days, means that I have to have incrementals and fulls. In the meantime, 1 terabyte of primary data is equal to 10 terabytes of backup data. So you can see that the amount of data that's generated out here is impacted 10 times by the backup system. So what's happening? What are we doing about this? What's out there in the marketplace right now that can help us with this? Well, one of the biggest things is deduplication. What deduplication does is it looks at the information that's flowing through the backup server and says, have I seen this information before? And if I did, only store it once, make 1 copy of it, and then I'll always be aware that I have this 1 copy, and I won't back up the information again. This was a huge thing in the backup environment because we had so much duplicate data that we were backing up over and over again. Well, deduplication sounds kind of like a simple thing, but really, it's not that simple. One of the reasons why is because a lot of times, in order to get things off of the LAN, we're running things through the SAN, okay? The SAN generally does what's called an offline backup. Basically, it talks directly to the backup server without using the LAN so that it can very quickly get things like databases and things, large amounts of data that change rapidly all the time. Those deduplicate very well at this level. We call this the target. But there's a bunch of other data. That means if I'm deduplicating everything at the target, so let me just say that, so some of our competitors out there right now have taken this disk and they've replaced it with something that's called a data domain. This is a target-based deduplication device. What that means is that everything runs completely through either the SAN, the WAN, or the LAN, again, through here, and is actually deduplicated at the target as it's ingested into the disk system. These are purpose-built appliances, and they're expensive to maintain, expensive, but they do a very good job, and they add a lot of goodness because basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to shrink the size of this box, okay? The problem with this now, well, not really the problem, but the issue is now that we're not using tape anymore, we're backing up to this target disk device, we have to be able to get it off site. So if we put this data domain device here, then pretty basically we have to go off site and put a data domain here. Now what happens, my data continues to grow and this box starts to get bigger again. That means that I either have to add a larger box here or I have to add disk here. Well, what happens every time you add disk here? You have to go out here and add more disk here. So it's kind of this continual thing. Now, what it's doing is it's stopping the box from growing faster. The box is still growing, it's just not growing as fast because we're deploying deduplication technology. Now, it just so happens that there's a lot of information out on these hosts, especially in a virtual environment, that would deduplicate much better at the source. This is called source-based deduplication. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to sit in an agent, just like this backup agent, sit in an agent on the host, and now this set of hosts are going to be controlled by another appliance. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at this information, it's going to deduplicate it at the host, and it's going to store it on a new appliance over here, a source-based appliance. This would be a data domain. this would be Abamar. Now basically, we have this. This box is going to shrink again because now we're deduplicating it up here before it gets down here. So what's happening now is we have another box. This box has to be put out here as well. We'll just call this AV for Abamar. And this one needs to replicate to this one. These are two totally different boxes. They don't talk to each other. And the only way to replicate them is to put them out here. Now what happens, our data, so we shrunk this box down again. What's happening? Explosive data growth. Things are still continuing. Now we've got all of our applications running through this backup server, going out to disk, which is the data domain. Now what happens is we run out of space on the data domain. The size of the data domain has to increase. So maybe we have to forklift this one out and get a new one, or we add another one. So if we add another data domain there, we have to add another data domain here. This whole thing replicates out here. Guess what? This one's still growing. So we have to add another grid here. And this one has to go out here as well. And all of a sudden, this box that we're trying to keep growing smaller and smaller basically begins to grow again because our data keeps growing. So what we've done is we've done goodness here because we've eliminated a lot of the traffic off of the LAN by deduplicating at the source. We've eliminated a lot of traffic on the SAN by deduplicating at the target. But as you can see, this thing is not really getting simpler. It's really getting a little bit more complicated. This is called data protection, and all that is an insurance policy. If something happens to my data, I can get it back. Now, how is this information looked at? So in this particular case, everything that's up here is looked at in a digital format, a string of ones and zeros, which means that everything that's down here is a string of ones and zeros. Those ones and zeros are a description of the data that's in here so that if something happens to the data here, 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 anywhere, we can get it back here by using this digital description. We know where the data is, and we know what to go get and how to bring it back. Data protection. So data protection basically is an insurance policy. That's all it is. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get ourselves past data protection and insurance and into data management. So how do we do that? Well, basically, if you were to take this piece right here and replace it with Commvault, now, all of a sudden, at the very first pass of the data, instead of it being a bunch of dumb ones and zeros like it is here, what if we replaced that with data classification? So data classification would mean that by taking one pass at the data, I can tell you the type of file it is, I can tell you how large it is, I can tell you when it was created, who created it, how long has it been since somebody touched it. All of this information about this data is what's called data classification. Okay? So data classification, I have talked to many CTOs and many CIOs. Data classification is something that is very important. And why do you think that is? I'll tell you why that is. Because in order to manage this explosive data growth, I have to know something about the data. I have to know the type of file it is, how large it is. How can I do that today? How can I do that today? Because I have to, in order to do that, I have to have something that's touching all of the important data in my environment. So the way they do it today is they go out and they hire a consulting company. The consulting company comes in, he walks around to everybody in the organization and says, what type of files do you create? How often do you create those? How many of them are there? How long does that data sit before somebody touches it again? It's a physical type of survey. They take this physical survey with the information that they're getting, which is a bunch of dumb ones and zeros, and they try to figure out from that survey the data classification, how to classify the data. They walk back in, $250,000 to $1 million. 6 weeks later, they throw a beautiful report on the CIO's desk, and guess what? That data is already 6 weeks old. It's stale, and everything in the environment has changed. So, how do we do this? So, the big question becomes right here is what, this is a question mark, what is in that box? Nobody that is doing it out there right now besides existing Commvault customers can tell you what's in that box. With one pass at the data with Commvault, we can classify the data. We can do this on an ongoing, real-time basis, which means that instead of having this static report, we can give them something that we call SRM, which is Storage Resource Manager, which gives them a window into their data. How important is that? It's hugely important to try to figure out how do you manage this data. So all of a sudden, instead of this being a bunch of dumb ones and zeros in here, it's a bunch of intelligent information about the data. So basically, now we can begin to make decisions about this data. Now, what about the deduplication piece of this? Wow, this thing is all too complicated. It's getting messy, it's expensive, it's all tied to hardware, and this hardware level that we've created has nothing to do with how I'm building out my existing infrastructure. These are all purpose-built appliances, every one of these, and you cannot get to any of the data that's in there to do any kind of analysis on that data. So what if I told you that not only could we classify the data, but if I replace this with Commvault, now I don't need this target-based deduplication anymore. My standard disk that's in this box works. I don't care what kind of disk it is. We're totally agnostic to the hardware layer. Oh, geez, you know what that means? That means I don't need this stuff out here in this box either. All I need is just some standard disk, whatever it is that I use in my infrastructure. Don't need this truck anymore because we're not using tape. And guess what? What if I told you that I could make a decision by clicking a box and saying I either want to deduplicate my data at the source, or I want to deduplicate it as it's ingested into the disk. This is very simple for Commvault, which means that we don't need this piece of it anymore. Wow, things are getting a lot simpler. Amazing, amazing that everything is shrinking down and we're using everything in here. Not only can we do deduplication, we can do storage resource management, give them the window into this information. We can do all kinds of other things. One of the most important things that everybody's talking about today is archiving. Archiving is becoming huge, and one of the reasons why is this piece right here, which is the storage area network, or the SAN, is one of the most expensive pieces in the infrastructure. Problem with this SAN is, since we don't know anything except a bunch of dumb ones and zeros about what's going on out here, is this SAN is filled with information. About 70% of it hasn't been touched in over a year. Very, very big problem. How do I know what information that is? Well, I can give you a picture into that now. using SRM. But what if I told you that not only could I give you a window into it, but what if I gave you a policy engine where you could set a policy that says that if it's this type of file and it's this size and it was created by this group and it hasn't been touched in this long, take it from this very expensive SAN and move this down to a set of very inexpensive standard disks. Don't need any fancy software on here because we're managing everything from the software layer. Now, what if I told you that we could do deduplication, SRM, we could do archiving, we could do e-discovery, we can replicate the data and move it around, we can do anything that you need done with the data. Because we're now intelligent and we've classified the data, we can literally do anything with it. We can do this with a single layer of software that is fully integrated, made by a company that has organically grown and has never purchased another company as long as we've been around. That would be pretty big. So you can see that basically what we've done is we've helped to manage the explosive data growth. We have done that by simplifying the environment. And now, since we were doing it at the software layer instead of the hardware layer, we basically are taking full advantage of the consolidation efforts that you're putting in place by virtualizing your environment. So having said that, we have moved you from data protection or just buying an insurance policy to actually doing data classification and allowing you to manage the data that you're dealing with. So my point is to you as salespeople is to remember a very important thing. One, if you don't show the customer the pain, you got to remember that the pain is generally latent. It's back here. Where we started off with this original drawing and went to this complicated system before we erased everything out of here, these guys are used to doing on a daily basis. It's latent pain. They don't like it. They're trudging through it on a daily basis. You ask anybody in an environment, how do you like your backup system? What do you think you're going to get for an answer? So you need to get this up to a very high level in the organization and get the point across that you are in alignment with exactly what the executive level initiatives are. So all of this that I illustrated was showing the customer pain. So I'm taking that customer's pain from a latent point where he's just walking back and forth every day, doing the same thing over and over again to the very front lobes up here. And by doing that, what I've done is showed him the value of Commvault. 70% of every deal that we lose out there right now is to no change. They don't change. They don't change. Everything that we've heard, everything that we've seen, 70% of the deals that we lose are because the customer won't change. My point is, if you can't bring the pain from back here to up here where they recognize that they have pain, they won't see the value in what it is that you're doing, and they will not change. Do not put yourself in that category. Are we the same as Symantec? Are we the same as IBM? Are we the same as EMC? We are not. You have to sell data management. It's very important. You have to do it at a high level. And you can take this 70% and they will change to Commvault. Done. All right. I told you that was going to look like a mess when I was done.